So I'll get started. Now. So welcome everybody, and I'm sure we have some more people to come, but it's lovely to see the 11 people who are here already for this, which is the 10th seminar. I can't quite believe we've got up to 10, but the 10th seminar in the seminar series set up by the ISRS, the International Society for Research on Solitude, jointly hosted by the University of Szczecin and Bishop Grosseteste University. I am Julian Stern, for those who don't know me. I work at Bishop Grosseteste University, and I'm president of the ISRS, and hosting with me, rather secretly, because she doesn't seem to be here yet, Gosia Małgorzata Wołejko and Rafa Iwański, who are here, both from the University of Szczecin. Gosia is vice president, in charge of all the vice in the ISRS, and Rafa is secretary of the ISRS. We're going to be introducing, and I'm not getting started just yet, delighted to be introducing Mauro Fornasiero, who will talk about silence as a meditative practice, with 3 exemplary cases in dialogue. And I like that. I wanted to have a word first about the ISRS. There is a wonderful website which you can go to, which has previous seminars. I think all the previous seminars now are listed there and have been recorded there. This seminar too is being recorded. That should show on your screen. If you don't wish to be seen on the recording, of course, you can switch your camera off. And if you want to be, don't wish to be heard on the recording, do that as well. If you wish any further anonymization, just let myself or the ISRS know on that email at the near the bottom of the screen, right.isrs@gmail.com. You will see on the website you can join for free the ISRS, and then you'll be on a mailing list and we'll hear more things. We have had 4 conferences, international conferences, 1 in York, 2 in Szczecin, albeit mostly online, 1 in Lincoln in the UK, and next year we are hoping to be in Savannah, Georgia in the US, all being well. We also have a Solitude Studies series of the ISRS. Any of you want to write a book or edit a book, we have a whole Solitude Studies series co-sponsored with Bloomsbury and the ISRS. We have a couple of books already published in that series, including The Art, Literature and Music of Solitude, which has a particularly good author there, Julian Stern, and there is another book just coming out, just to be launched in that series, which we'll tell you about. And before that series was started, we, again with the ISRS, published the Bloomsbury Handbook of Solitude, Silence and Loneliness. There have also been several special issues of journals. So it's a delight to be working with so many good colleagues on solitude studies from so many different disciplines. And today, I'm delighted to introduce Mauro Fornasiero, who on his own represents and has experience in a number of different disciplines. He's currently researching at York St John University and Liverpool Cathedral. He has researched in cultural sociology, culture, American study, all sorts of things. I think, Mauro, if you want to talk about your own background, you are more than welcome, but it's good and characteristic of a number of us in the ISRS that we work across disciplinary areas, and you're going to be talking about silence. You are allowed to be silent, Mauro, but we would also like to hear what you have to say. So yes, it's the right Mauro. I can see your picture now. I will stop sharing my screen now and share, but I will continue. Welcome, Gosia. You are there. Oh, how nice to see you. And I'll start sharing Mauro's I actually see lots of additional people. Sandra as well. Good to see you. I will now try to share Mauro's. There it is. Mauro will be talking for perhaps 25 to 30 minutes. After that, there'll be plenty of time for discussion. There'll be plenty of time for comments, discussion, questions, and talking, and perhaps silence if any of you want to. So Mauro, over to you. And because I'm sharing the screen, because the PowerPoint seems to work on my computer, Mauro will shout at me in a kind and gentle way whenever the screen needs changing. Over to you, Mauro.
Thank you very much for your kind words of introduction. Before we start with the case studies, I would like to start with a preamble. Next slide, please. Julia, next slide, please.
Yeah.
So in this preamble, I'm trying to locate silence. I am Italian, and when I go home in Italy, in Padua, I find myself to visit quite often the sanctuary of Madonna del Monte in Teolo, which is located in the northeast of Italy, in the province of Padua, and more specifically, as you can see in the pictures, at the top of the hill. This sanctuary is attached to a community, a Benedictine community. As we can see in the second picture, we got the church, a porch, and then the home of the community. And going back to the first picture, we see a slope where I'm trying to locate silence. So if we imagine that sanctuary is located at the top of the hill, which is a place of pilgrimage, but also a place that is quite busy because we got a lot of cyclists, especially at the weekend, but also lots of people that go trekking. So at the beginning, if we look at the first picture, we see the slope. If we imagine that we're walking up, at the very entrance, we got a gate, which has got a notice that remind us of silence. So that is the first reminder that locates silence physically. Walking up the hill, we arrive at the second picture at the bottom, where we see a close-up of a notice that says silence. There are differences. Those pictures were taken in different times, so I can guarantee that in September there was that notice that says silence. And particularly, that notice underneath that describes the sanctuary, it reminds us that, saying, please respect those that come to this place to seek silence and prayer. And next to it, if we can see, we got two little pillars with a chain. So that is the next physical reminder that invite visitors to stop and reflect and think about silence. And then if we just focus a moment on this porch here, okay, on the porch in the middle. In the next slide, please. Next slide, please, Julian. We see that there is this mobile reminder placed in a chair that the community put every time that there is a service, and it reminds us with an angel that clearly invites us to be silent, that there is a service in progress. So before moving to the first case studies, this in a way preamble reminds us that silence can have a place, and these three layers that are marked geographically give us a sense that silence is a practice that perhaps sometimes is not really embedded in modern society. So bearing in mind these things about this idea around practice and silence, we start with the first case study. Next slide, please. So in the first case study, we start from England, and more specifically in Cornwall, and even more specifically in the Diocese of Truro. In 2002, 2003, I was involved in the evaluation of a pilot study called Preparing to Retire Well, which is a reflective practice group that support the well-being, the emotional, spiritual well-being of retiring and retired clergy. And here we got the phases that remind us of the study. I will just try to draw the attention on, and they had different components starting from the setup and running on the steering group. But what I would like to draw the attention is the last phase, the evaluation of the phases, where basically I was evaluating what was working, what was not, what was working and what was not working in this group, and this gave an insight into silence. And if we go to the next slide, please. So the evaluation itself, it was I was conducting an interview with two groups, retiring and retired ministers that attended the reflective practice group. We are looking at a small sample, about 7 people, and also key diocesan members that had an input on this reflective practice group. And the aim specifically of this evaluation was to provide an insight into the spiritual identities of retired ministers and their spiritual emotional well-being. So if we move to the next slide, please. So when I was doing the evaluation, I was covering 4 areas, but the one in the middle gave an insight into the spiritual well-being and pastoral care practices. That's where we started where I started exploring some ideas around silence. And if we move to the next slide, please. I got 2 quotes that I would like to read out loud that help us to contextualize silence as a spiritual care practice. So in the first quote, we got the interviewee that says, I think as I've got older, I become more and more contemplative and more dependent upon silence, waiting upon God. So my prayer time may contain far fewer words than they ever did, still very much scripturally and daily office-based, but with lots of space in between for silence, reflection, and prayer. So clearly, this first quote give a sense of silence as a contemplative practice that is contextualized in prayer. And also an indication that in the first part of the sentence, I think as I've got older, this notion in this interview that age is a good companion or an indication of silence. In the next one, we are looking still at the idea of silence in the constant prayer, but it's more a different take, and I read it. I do pray at my best when I am out walking. I love being in creation, and I have always done that, so that's nothing new to me. I like variety when I go for a walk. It is songs, silence, creation, scripture. Silence is a component here of prayer, and it becomes in a combination of different styles of prayer. So in this specific case study, we look at, though it was the aim of the evaluation itself, it was not on silence, it comes up on the idea of pastoral care practice, and it gives us a sense of silence as a meditative practice in the context of prayer. So if we move to the next slide, please. In the next slide, I would like to talk about Romano Guardini, that was a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, a theologian, and he's been defined as a philosopher of silence. And this gives us a more sense of silence from a theoretical perspective, from a theological perspective, and a philosophical perspective. And see how Romano Guardini conceptualizes silence. We see that from his approach to silence is from phenomenological, so from a practice-based, and silence is interlinked in a way to word. So it's like the double side of a coin. We got silence, but we got word, we got speech. And it carries on highlighting the fact that silence is intrinsic to every person, and this is the road to give access or experience the sacred. Silence, he adds, is a way to the soul of inner life, and meditation is his meditation as a practice of silence. So, moving to the next slide, please. I would like to contextualize silence, giving some quotes from the meditation before Mass, that these are some meditation that Guardini wrote in Germany in 1939. I was looking at the translation, a literal translation in English, where silence is contextualized in a liturgical sense. And I am helping with the aid of pictures that I took at the Abbey al Monte in Cesena, that is home of a sanctuary, but also of a Benedictine monastic community. And I'm really glad and I really welcome and grateful that we had Don Mauro here today with us. So looking at the first meditation, it helps us to locate silence in the sense of stillness. So thus we have discussed stillness negatively, no speech, no sound, but it's much more than the absence of this, a mere gap, as it were, between words and sound. Stillness itself is something positive. Stillness is the tranquility of the inner life. It is a collected, total presence, a being all there, receptive, alert, ready. There is nothing inert or oppressive about it. And it carries on with the idea that stillness is the prerequisite for the liturgical holy act. And in this sense, I find these pictures of the altar, the epicenter of the idea of liturgical act. Just to give a bit of background of the meditation before Mass, is some preaching that Father Guardini did before the Mass for people that attended church, that later on has been translated, put into writing. And in the specific case, I just wanted to reflect on the locality and the geography, in a way, of silence that we see in the specific case at the Abbey in Cesena. We got the altar that is surrounded by the choir on the background. So people, monks and visitors sitting and praying with the monks got access to the altar from all different angles, and they can concentrate without distraction. So if we move to the next slide, please. And here we got the second meditation that give us this sense of silence and the word. So we remember this flip side of silence and speech that come together. So only in such stillness can the congregation fundamental to the sacred ritual come into being. Only in stillness can the room in which Holy Mass is celebrated be exalted into a church. Hence, the beginning of divine service is the creation of stillness. Stillness is intimately related to speech and the word. So here he really highlights and stresses the fact that silence is a component of speech, and speech is a component of silence. And here on the side, I got two pictures with two details of, on the left and on the right, of the choir, where I was sitting myself as a guest, as a member, as a guest of the community, praying with the community. So if we look on the left side, again, the furniture itself of the choir help us to reach silence. So if we look at the seat, at the very top, we got some relatively high armchairs that when the person sits is able to, although he's sitting next to some mother that is praying, he's got this sense of feeling cocooned, or this sense of privacy. When they stand up, the seats that we see lifts up, and the arms become a place where the person that is praying is resting and holding the prayer book that we see on the right-hand side. And again, these simple aids in the furniture really help us to concentrate, to meditate, and also to localize silence, and also to have a privileged view and access and be part of the celebration that take place at the altar. If we move to the next slide, please. So we got a final quotation from the meditation number 3, where there is a third component about silence. There is a silence in a combination with speech, but also there is the other element that silence facilitates hearing. So silent speech are interdependent. Together they form a nameless unit that supports our spiritual life. There is, however, another element essential here, hearing. The word of God is meant to be heard, and hearing requires silence. And here on the side, this idea of hearing is a reminder of the rule of Benedict that was written around 530, where we got in the prologue this idea that Saint Benedict invites monks and followers to listen with the ear of the heart. Hence, and this is a picture that I took from an abbey in St. Paul Abbey in Minnesota, and he really summarized this idea of listening with the ear of the heart. So in this specific case, before we move to the next, we see that in the case of Guardini, silence is liturgical and is seen in combination with speech, the word, that can be the word of humans or the word of God, and also in the context of hearing, and more specifically with the overarching idea of silence in a liturgical context. If we move to the next slide, please. So for the final case studies, we're moving more to the context of hospital settings, so spiritual and pastoral care in health settings. And in this case, I showcase Cornwall, which is the county where I live in the UK. And looking at the website of the Cornwall Partnership Foundation Trust, this cluster of hospitals in the NHS makes a distinction between religion that is personal and spirituality, which is universal. And within the care, this trust is trying to reach the goal of feeling valued, be listened with empathy, express their feelings honestly, and so forth. And these are all the components that are part of the chaplaincy care that they offer. And more specifically, in the next slides, please. Next slide, please. Hello? Thank you. No, the one before. Yeah. So in the sense of chaplaincy, they offer when a patient meets with a chaplain, the chaplain offers pastoral care, existential care, ethical care, and religious care, which really cover any kind or level of religious aspect and spiritual aspect, both from a humanist perspective and a religious perspective. So it is in this context that it is interpersonal that we can locate silence in the relationship that the chaplain established with the patients. So we see the next slide, please. So now, looking specifically at the use of silence in community hospitals chaplaincy, we are looking specifically at the relationship that the chaplain builds with the person that is in hospital. That normally, most of the time, is transient because the chaplain might meet the patient just once, for different reasons, because these people get discharged or they don't want a second meeting, but it's normally transient. So in this specific case, in this relationship, silence is contextualized seen as absence of a conversation between the chaplain and the patient. And these moments of silence enable the chaplain to absorb the word and to understand their meaning. Sometimes there is a gap between what the patient say and how they feel. For instance, we got the case that patients are clearly not well because in our hospital, and in a question they may answer politely to the question, "How are you?" "I'm fine." So this kind of moment of silence help people to gauge how they feel, both the chaplain and the patient. And in this sense, that this ability of reflecting, both for the chaplains and the patient, is very significant in the case of patients with dementia, because they are forgetful. So it gives time for them to reflect. It's also true that in the context of chaplaincy and in the conversation, extended period of silence are not profitable. They are not really useful as such. If we move to the next slide, please. So if we look at chaplaincy now, and in specific case of end of life care, we see that silence become a safe space during brief chats between the chaplain and the person. So silence is quite welcome. And in a religion context, the moment of prayer, silence is combined with a moment of prayer, where normally there is holding hands, followed by silence. And in this case, the combination of body language, of touch, silence, and words, a little word, becomes a comfort blanket. The combination of silence and body contact, holding hand, provides a safe space where the patient feels that the chaplain is there for them. So there is this sense of silence as a comfort in the relationship between the chaplain and the patient. Next slide, please. So, in conclusion, we got different aspect of silence as a meditative practice that can be geographical. We see the example of Teolo, the Abbey in Teolo, that in that space we got geographical signs of silence. We got 3 points where people, visitors, pilgrims are invited to silence. In the case of the reflective practice group preparing to retire well, we see that silence is a component of spiritual care, and it hints at a contemplative and prayer. In the case of Guardini, silence is liturgical and is a way to the inner life. And in the case, finally, of chaplaincy, silence is interpersonal and can become a safe space. Next slide, please. So this is the end of my conclusion, but before finishing the presentation, I would really like to thank people that really were essential for me conducting this research in different levels. In no specific order, I would like to thank Father Timoteo, that is a monk at the Abbey, the little community in Teolo. We got Reverend John Itok, that is here with us today. There's the Dean of Retired Clergy, and is leading the Reflective Practice Group in Truro. We got Abbot Mauro here, that I'm really grateful, because he really let me be part of the community for an extensive time of period last year, over the summer and over spring. So I really had a spiritual sense of what it means to be silent in a monastic Benedictine community. I would like also to thank Reverend Martin Pinnock, that is one of the chaplains at the Cornwall Foundation Trust. And last but not least, also the organizers of this seminar, Julian, Gosha, and Raphael, for giving me this opportunity to showcase silence as a reflective practice. And finally, the very last slide, please. We got some references. And this is the end of my presentation. So I'm not sure how to read this silence.
Yes, it's silent. I'm trying to look for there it is. I know I can actually clap my hands, but thanks to the technology, I can also show a hand clap as well. But I'm sure other people too. That was fascinating, Mauro. If other people, if you wish to keep your cameras off, I understand that. But if you wish to put your cameras on, if you wish to join us for some discussion, you are more than welcome. And I know that Mauro will be extremely happy to answer any questions you have. And the traditional chair's privilege means that I can always, if I wish to, I can always ask the first question. Now, I can't see either actual physical hands up or electronic hands up. So can I ask, Mauro, would you, I was fascinated by your work on voice and silence, and the silence and the word being complementary. And I've done a fair bit of work on music, and I think the same is true of music. The importance of silence in music as part of music is really revealing once you start to understand that. I was interviewed yesterday by an Islamic radio station who had done their research and knew that I first qualified as a piano teacher. And the interviewer said, "What from your piano teaching did you learn that you then used as a school teacher, particularly teaching religion?" And I said, it was the value of hearing, because if you play an instrument, you have to learn how to hear yourself play and hear other people play. And focusing on hearing is important, I think, for teachers too, and for students to listen carefully. So I wondered if that's similar to what you were saying, and I appreciate you were quoting Guardini on talking and listening and the importance of hearing in these situations. So the value of silence in order to hear is also true in music. I wonder if you recognize that, Mauro.
Thank you very much for this question, because actually it reminds me of one component of monastic spirituality, and more specifically the Benedictine. There is the element of a Gregorian chanting. When I was showing earlier the picture of the choir, when you join the community and you engage with the psalm, and some are sung in Gregorian chants. And two things that comes to mind when you were talking about silence in the sense of a pause and actively chanting. So there is an alternation in the psalmody and the prayer with that I did when I was in Cesena, that it gives pace. So there are, in the liturgy, there are moments also in the Eucharist where people are invited to pause and be silent, but more specifically in the psalmody, also the body language where people stand. And I gave when I was talking about the furniture, they bow in specific moments. So this is our own moment where the word is alternated with chanting. Sometimes, okay, these psalms are in Latin, and not many people, well, not all people knows Latin, but nonetheless, engaging with this technique, recognizing some words, is engaging with silence and prayer at the God or the transcendent. The other element also that is quite important to notice in the case of the Benedictine spirituality or a monastery is this, that at Compline, which is normally at 9:30, I would say 9, after that, technically it's time for silence, time for meditating, a pause. That silence is broken early in the morning with the new rhythm of prayer. So there is this constant reference between silence and the word, pausing also in the structure, and chanting that is per se musical. That is not that happens. I gave the example of the community in Cesena is we can find in most monastic communities, but also in the Anglican Church there is, when there is even song, for instance, or the matins in the morning, there is this sense of alternating, maybe not chanting and such, but moment of prayer or speech and the word, speech and silence. in the specific case of Anglican cathedrals, or in the context of Anglicanism, we see that the choir sing and the people are invited to listen and be silent. So there is the element of musicality and silence that is very true in different realities, and more specifically the one that I experienced myself, which is the Benedictine formula.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I wonder, Jarek, you have a question.
Yes, but if you want to continue with your question, I can wait.
Well, I have such a privilege of chairing, so I can. I need to give way. So, Jarek.
I agree with you when you're talking about the meaning, the significance of silence in the liturgy. But what do you think about the participation of children in the liturgy? It is not only the problem of participation, but also of the law of church and of allowing participation of children in some liturgy, some events, and not allowing to participate them in another events.
I think that the element of different audiences of children, for instance, and silence, it could be a challenging one, because maybe some children are more quiet than others, or maybe they are more disciplined than adults. That we don't really know. But I think that when we talk in silence, it seems a paradox, but silence creates community. Going back to the experience that I had in Cesena, and I had an extensive period in Cesena, sometimes, words were not really, we were not talking much, but the moments of prayer created community in a kind of a strange way. So going back to your question, the involvement of children, I think that the early exposure to silence is not really a matter, I think, of the extensive time of silence. It's something that becomes a practice where individuals become more and more aware of silence. When I was mentioning Guardini as a philosopher of the silence, and there is a reference of that text in Italian, when this writer was explaining about Guardini, he makes a difference between the silence that is somehow productive, or a silence that is there is no productive, or is a kind of an insight into a turmoil that is inside the person. So the silence, although we've seen that silence in chaplaincy is the absence of word or speech, is more kind of nuanced than that. A person can be very quiet, but really kind of loud inside, and not very able to be in tune with themselves. So I'm thinking out loud. I think that the examples of children and silence is an interesting one, because some children might love it, some might not appreciate it, but I think it's the same fashion probably with adults.
Okay.
I'd agree, and I can see. Oh, sorry. Apologies, Mauro. I interrupted you.
No, sorry, I just finished. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. I think a researcher called Heiligen Messe studied silence in schools, or rather as a primary teacher with 9-10-year-olds, I think, worked with them, where she started the lessons, a series of lessons, simply with silence, unstructured silence, not meditative, not prayerful, just silence for 30 seconds, and she worked up to a minute and a half, and then asked the children simply to write or draw what they were thinking about. And her whole doctorate, she was a professional teacher as well, but her whole doctorate was based on what those children then wrote or drew. And she found it, and they found it in different ways, a sort of spiritual experience. But silence in schools as not as a punitive thing, not shut up and listen to the teacher, but as a open-ended thing, a positive thing, is all too rare. And children, in her experience, in Helen Lee's, who's researched silence in schools experience, and my own, is welcomed by children as an equalizer, as it is by adults. So Cora, yeah, you have your hand up very patiently.
You've actually probably just said everything I was going to say, Julian.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
No, I was just coming
I should
in
be
on
silent,
that,
shouldn't I?
No, I was coming in on that point and around children, and primary school teacher is my background. But Mauro, just the imagery you used from the monastery, the geographical nature of it, the idea of readiness for silence. That's something that I would use a lot in practice. Very involved in a thing called godly play. Part of it is the getting ready, and the idea of crossing the threshold into silence, and also that it's not an imposed silence, as Julian was saying, but it's a choice. So the question children are asked when they're crossing the threshold is, "Are you ready?" So it's their choice as to whether or not they're ready. And I just thought your imagery captured that so beautifully. And the other thing that struck me as well is, you were talking about building community in silence, and hearing, Nell Morton's idea of hearing me into speech, that safe space. I was really struck the whole time by the importance of safety, because sometimes silence isn't a safe space. And I know it's something that has to be scaffolded. And I was really struck by how you presented that and how you used the imagery of the furniture to reinforce that point. And I'm really grateful that I was able to come on and hear that this evening. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that I really like when I do research to integrate as much as possible imagery to content. It really helps to locate, but also to reflect. There is also another element that I touched upon when I was talking about chaplaincy in the case of silence. It's true, broadly true, that some chaplains might have a background in psychotherapy or some sort of counseling. So there is also an element of silence that is therapeutic, in the sense of some therapists use silence as in a therapeutic sense. So there is that also element of silence used more in a medical sense. And this element of, now we're talking more, we are moving away, shifting away from a biomedical model where we're talking about health, we talk more about well-being. So this is more integrated in that. That's where now there is more scope to integrate spirituality, religion into a biomedical context. And that's what, in a way, the Preparing to Retire Well group is doing, because it's looking specifically at the spirituality and the emotional well-being of clergy that are preparing to retire and that are in early retirement, or more advanced into that.
Thank you. I see Gosha has her hand up. Gosha, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Actually, you partly answered. I had a question and you partly answered just a moment ago, but only partly. So I will continue asking this question. Your research and your project, as I suppose, is directed mainly or only to the clergy group, so to the believers, right? People somehow connected to the church and to religion, let's say. I was wondering about applying this theme and silence as meditative technique to those group of people, especially elderly people, approaching to the retirement and this, right, the spirit of their life, and trying to propose them this, but to those group who are not non-believers. And another question is the question about their spirituality, whether we can, what kind of spirituality we could consider when we talk about people who say that they don't want to belong to any religion, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, more romanistic, yeah. Now, thank you for these questions. I think that what I try to do in these case studies, although I start from, you're right, I mean, most of my research is religious. It could be arguably, say, more Catholic or Anglican or Anglo-Catholic. But what I'm trying to do is to use this as a format. When I was trying to showcase the example of even the most religious one, if we want, the Guardini that is talking about the altar, if we look at the example of the altar or the Gregorian chanting, for instance, and I mentioned earlier the example that some psalm can be chanted in Latin. I could, I don't have hardcore data on that, but it's about the process. So, for instance, a person that might read a psalm, okay, that they don't understand is the process of chanting in a community, in a specific space, that is a kind of technique or a procedure that can be applied in different contexts that are not necessarily religious. We see, for instance, 2 cases in Anglican cathedrals at the moment that they try to do classes where they integrate Tai Chi or yoga into religious settings. So we got this idea of things coming together. There is also another thing that some people may be surprising. When you go to a monastery and you have a chance to talk to a monk will never ask you if you're a believer. They got this open policy that comes from the rule of Benedict to have an open door for people. So in the sense, although it is a specific, is a monastery, is a holy place, and it could be Catholic, it could be Anglican, it could be, there is this sense of openness and non-feeling judged in these settings. Obviously, the liturgy is attached to a specific line of belief, but arguably, what is important to stress here is the procedure in a way. For instance, I don't know, the use of those specific chair, the furniture they use in the choir, that could be replicated in a different context, done more cheaply because they are a work of art. But the idea of being cocooned, be part of a community, reading, it could be a different kind of text. It doesn't have necessarily be a Roman Catholic text or a psalm from the Bible. It could be any practice that uses silence as a practice. And the transcendent, in a way, can be something outside us, using more a romantic literary idea. The English romantic, like Wordsworth, like the early romantics, we talk about the idea of the third eye, or that connection with themselves.
Yeah. So spirituality doesn't have to be necessarily linked to any religion, but
no, I think that what I found useful was the distinction that they did in the Cornell Foundation when they were talking that is a lay hospital. They were making an interesting distinction between religion is personal, okay, and spirituality is universal. And then they said when you engage into spirituality. That I think that is a useful is a useful distinction. If you were to ask me what is religion, I think that is creating a relationship with God. If you're looking at the example of a monk, is a person that, or a nun is a person that is searching. So then maybe some monks, I don't know, they haven't found God yet, or they found it, and sometimes they get lost as all human beings, but it's part of the process and the effort, I think. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I see John Eatock. Good to see you, or to see your initial at the moment, but would you like to ask a question, John? You are currently muted.
Can you hear me now?
There you are. Yes. It's
good to be with you and to hear my colleague Mauro talking. I'm a priest and a psychotherapist, and I'm aware that, as far as I can see, silence is never really empty. In psychotherapy, I sit with a client, and one of the skills is about timing and about the use of the space where there is silence. And the silence, a lot is going on in that silence. People are coming to terms with something, they're reflecting about something. And the other thing is, as a priest, I'm aware that when you're in a sacred or a place, and it could be not just a church, but outside, when there is silence, you are in a way invaded by or engaged with other things that are around you that are coming into your silence. And you come to terms with that, or maybe receive something from the outside. And the other thing is something I was reading the other day. It's a book about Anthony Blue, who was a Russian Orthodox bishop who died some time ago. But the book was about liturgy and the Orthodox liturgy, and there is a time halfway through the Orthodox Mass when the deacon says, "Close the doors," and that is intended to isolate the Christian community so that they can concentrate on the sacrifice of the Mass. And there is a silence, as if the outside world is shut out so that we can focus. And silence is often a time of focusing, of recollection. And when I'm running the reflective practice group with the retired priest, there is silence, but the reflective practice group is really a therapy group in many ways, of coming to terms and doing it collectively and slowly and deliberately in a sort of gathered silence. Mauro may understand what I'm trying to say. Just my observation.
Thank you. I think I thought that also going back to what Gosha was asking earlier, there are different ways, obviously, to conceptualize in silence. One that comes to mind that could potentially be dangerous is the discursive nature of silence. Silence as more in Foucauldian terms, so the idea of the silence per se generate a narrative, a discourse. So that kind of silence got the potential to be punitive and potentially also to brainwash people. But there is also, again, the flip side, a silence that leaves people free. Again, sorry if I dwell again on the idea when I was in the monastery, but when I was in the monastery, I felt really free. I got access, I could go in and out if I wanted to. There was the kind of element of silence done in that sense allowed a sense of freedom, and is the constant practice that is in that sense liturgical, because it repeats itself, that embed silence in the person, and in the sense of the words, for people that believe or people that don't believe, resonates in a different ways. So for people that are believers, they might believe in the sense that the presence of the Holy Spirit that suggests that. For people that don't believe it, they can say, okay, this word resonates with me in different way because it reminds me of what I did as a child. You know, that kind of reflection in the right context could be therapeutic at the right time, at the right moment. When I was into earlier, if it's not done correctly, in a correct way, silence can be very disruptive. And that is where, you know, there is always the ambivalence that is becoming a part, that is part of silence. And as Guardini says, there is kind of monadic in a way, is silence and speech, silence and the word. Is not one or the other, is an alternation or a combination of the two.
I think that's fascinating, Mauro, and you've brought up an issue that I think is important. People in authority often use silence. They silence people, whether it's in institutions or churches or homes or schools. But also those same authority figures are often fearful of what you call a freeing silence. And a lot of people, in fact, young people and older people, are scared of silence. They want to fill silence with chatter or with music or with something to avoid silence. Do you want to talk about, I see Piotr as a question as well, but do you have any ideas on why people fear silence?
I think that silence can be anxiety provoking. I give you an example that I did in my PhD research when I was working in public health. I was looking at HIV prevention. And in the early stages of the pandemic, HIV was really a scary thought. It was a sign of death. So silence also in the way that the silence around HIV prevention was designed was really a scary, because, you know, silence meant, you know, absence and meant death. So that is an example of a disruptive use of silence. And that was attached to a discourse around religion and sexuality, for instance. So that it was an example, and then that kind of example was sometimes still maybe used in some specific early health campaigns around prevention, HIV prevention, where they were more on the side of scaring people rather than, you know, make people aware of HIV and how to protect themselves, for instance.
Thank you. Thank you. Piotr Domoraci, you have a question. It's good to, we were just corresponding earlier today, Piotr, so you are currently, your camera is off and you have been muted, but I think you're coming to join us.
Thank you.
Now.
Thank you, Julian.
Hi.
Okay, thank you, Mauro, for your presentation. At first, I was particularly interested in it on the issue of silence as a factor for creating community. It was a little bit discussed before a while by my previous persons. Generally, silence is presented as being connected to solitude, rather. I'm interested in explanation what the community building role of silence is indeed, and in what it's expressed. And if I might add something more, am I far from the truth in claiming that silence is a form of speaking? And to be precise, it's a kind of internal dialogue, which Saint Augustine calls soliloquium. If silence is an internal dialogue, it's never really the absence of words, if you said it, but it's another form of expression. And the question is, who is the addressee of them? Not likely the other person, I think. Then who? Myself, or perhaps God above all? Is then the community forming role of silence limited to the building of a community of humans with God, or is it about some other broader community? If so, what kind, with whom? How do you think? What is your reflection dealing with that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think I will start from the very last part of your question, where you were talking about silence as, do we have silence, or is it more inner conversation? Perhaps, and maybe some other people know more around what I'm about to say. We find an answer, a possible answer, in the early fathers, the church fathers, the father of the desert, in the sense that in the monastery you use those texts, but if we use that kind of analytical lens of the fathers, spiritual, theological, and I'm a bit hesitant in saying that from a patristic perspective, that what you're hinting is the early fathers will go to the desert to achieve silence. And other religions will really talk about silence when that kind of internal conversation disappears. That is the need, the very essence of spirituality and connecting with God.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, when you got that connection, and this I'm talking about more influenced by Basileus, more the Byzantine connection, is more this idea that when you reach that kind of conversation with yourself, that sense of stillness, you become more aware that you're surrounded by God. He uses in this liturgical context that God is surrounded that. And again, I would like to stress, when we talk about God, I'm talking about generic God. It doesn't necessarily abide a Catholic or a Protestant or, an Islamic, or we are talking the concept itself of God. That is the first thought that comes to mind. The other element that you were asking about, meditation, silence that create community. This is an idea that doesn't belong to me. I read it when I was looking at monastic spirituality, Benedictine spirituality. There was a Benedictine monk called John Main that spent time in the East, so integrated the technique in the East and integrated them in the monastic spirituality. And I think that there is a center in France where they organize retreats following this idea of John Main. And this formula is also adopted in other monastic reality. So in this sense, I mean, in a specific Catholic, there is the presence of the Spirit that enables to create community. In a more kind of secular way or humanistic way, the element of silence or meditation create a sense of community, because you're doing it together. And the repetition, the fact that you got a routine, a specific place where you come together, that create a sense of community. That is what comes to mind. There is a book that I read written in America that really reflects on this, that can pass the information if it's of help. Yeah, where was the third component of your question?
If I could add,
who is
maybe something other than the third component, but I would like to mention of Master Eckhart, who argued that every human being, in order to encounter God, must isolate he or herself from everything what is natural, but not in the sense of external relations, but rather internal attachments. And moreover, due to Eckhart, a human being must also overcome, abandon his or her own silence, so that the place of the abandoned silence could be filled by the presence of God. So it's, as I could say in that way, according to Eckhart, probably the most extreme form of not being silent, but rather being in silence. In order to overcome it, because only thanks to that, God can start the relationship with a human being.
I think that I'm not overly familiar with Master Eckhart. I think that we are moving towards more the medieval interpretation of spirituality, more on the scholastic side. I mean, although he's kind of on the German side, so I wouldn't have really any insightful thoughts on Master Eckhart in that sense, nor on St. Augustine in that sense that you mentioned earlier. Personally, I'm a more kind of fan in a way, maybe, I don't know, with the early church in that sense, more on the monastic tradition, simply because it resonates with me, not for any kind of reasons.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
and
thank you.
I think, and I think Piotr was asking how silence can help you individually, as in solitude. How does it help build community? And I have to say, sometimes, and my feeling, the USA today, recently, in recent years, has become more and more divided in various ways, and speech has divided it in various ways. And often maybe in a country, and certainly in a small community, I think being in silence together actually can make people think we are all here as a community together. And when people start talking, they start dividing each other, oppressing each other, or criticizing, or whatever. So the silence together can itself be a bringing together of a community. Not always, but it can be that. And I think Quaker meetings try to start in silence so that people feel they are together. But it doesn't have to be a religious. I would love the US to be silent amongst themselves, choose to be silent, to be able to feel together again. And would say the same about some families that I know, and other groups, and so on.
I think that there is this. I think that what I would like to add to this, because I mean, I agree in what you're saying. I think that as human beings, we are complex. So it really depends on the experience. So what we are saying, we have always put silence in a context and in a specific time. So we all have moments where we feel great. We have moments where we don't feel so great in life for whatever reasons. So I think that the moments that where we don't feel so great, maybe silence is not as productive as I mentioned when we were talking about chaplaincy. However, maybe silence with a person that holds your hand, metaphorically, also physically sometimes, or give you a nice hug, can help to say, I'm here for you. And that kind of silence is reassuring. There is the silence, for instance, that you can have in a telephone conversation where you don't talk to a person in ages. You want to say a million things and you don't really know what to say. and and you keep the conversation very short, in the sense that, but there is that silence that in a way it builds relationships, because you say, I'm here, I'm present with all my imperfections, but I'm here, I remember you, you are in my thoughts, and hopefully vice versa. That's the best way that I can summarize it.
Thank you. And I agree with you. I think people in powerful positions may need to practice more silence, and people in less powerful position, perhaps that is not, they are already silenced in various ways and may want to find their voices. And talking of finding silence, we're getting to the end of our session, and I don't wish to leave someone who would like to ask a question. A couple of people have had to leave already. I don't wish to leave someone who would like to ask a question not asking one. And I see Joanna and Rafa have not asked. I'm not asking you to ask a question, but does anyone have a question left over? And Mauro as well. It has been wonderful. I will soon be silent myself. This is me being sort of silent. I'm building up to silence. If not, I've told this story before. A teacher, after asking a question, leaves a space, a silence for children or young people to put their hands up or to answer. The average time they leave is less than half a second. I am being unusual in leaving longer than half a second then. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Mauro. I think you knew that people would have interesting questions, and I'm delighted that the questions have been so rich and complex, and the answers and the ideas and your answers too. Can I thank everyone here for being here with us? A couple of people I know couldn't get to us, but who said they were getting to us, and a couple of others wished they'd been able to get to us. I'm so pleased it's been recorded so that they will be able to follow up later as well. But can I thank most of all Mauro Fornasiero for such a stimulating and interesting talk. Thank you very much. I will clap my actual hands because the electronic hand clap is rather difficult. But can I thank you? We have our next already. We have another seminar in April coming up. I think April, is it April the 11th? I see other thumbs up and clapping too. But please do join us in the ISRS if you're not already with us, and join us again, I hope, for our next seminar in April. So thank you very much. I would like a quick word with Gosha and Rafa at the end. I will talk to many of you at other times as well. But thank you, Mauro, and you can now retire into silence.
Thank you very much for everything and for the opportunity and for the warm response. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.